It was already past 7 when I reached his house. To my surprise, he had visitors. Kirilov and a man called Shigalov, whom I knew slightly. He was Mrs. Virginsky's brother. Shigalov must have been around our town for a couple of months or so at that time. I have no idea where he'd come from. All I know is that he'd had an article published in one of Petersburg's progressive magazines. Virginsky had once introduced us in the street, and he'd struck me from the first as the gloomiest man with the most constant scowl I'd ever seen. Shigalov always seemed to be expecting the end of the world, and his was not one of those vague expectations based on some prophecy that might turn out to be wrong. No, he seemed absolutely certain that the end was coming, say, the next day at 11:25 a.m. On this occasion, Shigalov and I didn't exchange a word. We simply shook hands like a couple of conspirators. What struck me most about him was his ears. They were incredibly large and thick, and they protruded at an uncanny angle. His movements were awkward and ponderous, and where Laputin merely hoped that one day utopia might be established in our province, this fellow was sure of the day and the hour when it would happen. I found him quite sinister and was exceedingly surprised to meet him at Shatov's, especially as Shatov wasn't too fond of visitors anyway. I heard their voices while I was still on the stairs. They were all talking at once, apparently arguing, but as soon as I appeared, they fell silent. They had been standing up as they argued, but now they sat down, so I had to sit down too. An awkward silence followed and lasted for at least 3 minutes. Although I knew he recognized me, Shigalov pretended he didn't. Not out of any hostility, I'm sure, but just like that, for no reason. Kirilov and I nodded to each other but didn't shake hands. Then Shigalov scowled at me sternly in the naive belief that I would just get up and leave. At last, Shatov rose from his chair. The other two also leaped up and left without saying goodbye. When he was in the doorway, Shigalov turned and threw out at Shatov, "Remember, we're waiting for a full account from you." "Like hell, I'll give you an account. And you know what you can do with yourselves," Shatov said and locked the door behind them. "Slimy morons," he said, glancing at me and smiling a peculiar, crooked smile. Shatov looked furious. I was surprised to hear him volunteer that remark. Usually when I dropped in on him, which by the way I didn't do very often, he sat frowning for a long time, answered my questions reluctantly, and only toward the end came to life and talked freely. Then when he left him, he scowled as if he were getting rid of a personal enemy. "I had tea with that fellow Kirilov last night," I said. "He seems to be obsessed with atheism." "Russian atheism's never been anything but playing with words," Shatov grumbled, getting up to light a new candle to replace the burnt-out end. "No, this one doesn't look like just another phrase maker to me. He can hardly talk at all, let alone play with words. Those people have nothing but paper schemes and blueprints in their heads. They're nothing but a bunch of flunkies," Shatov said quietly, installing himself in a chair in a corner of the room and leaning his elbows on his knees. "And there's hatred in it, too," he added after a minute-long silence. "I know even if it were the change they want, if she became an... I know they would be the first to suffer if somehow Russia changed. Even if it were the change they want, if she became an infinitely wealthy and happy land, then there wouldn't be anyone for them to hate, spit upon, and mock. They have nothing but animal hatred for Russia, and it has corroded their organisms. And there are no tears hidden beneath their laughter. Never has a more hypocritical utterance been made in Russia than that one about tears concealed by laughter," he said loudly, almost beside himself with fury. What are you talking about? I said, laughing. And you're a moderate liberal, Shatov grunted. You know, he added suddenly, perhaps it was stupid of me to talk about their servility. You may say you're a fine one to talk, you who were born a serf. I had no intention of saying anything of the sort, believe me. Stop apologizing. I'm not afraid of what you might say. I was born of a flunky, and now I've become a flunky myself, just like you. A Russian liberal is bound to be a flunky who goes around looking for someone whose boots he can polish. What boots? What sort of allegory is that? It's not an allegory. I see it amuses you. True, Mr. Verkovensky says that I'm lying under a rock. Squashed, but not quite crushed to death, just wriggling. That's a clever way of describing my state. Mr. Verkovensky assures me that you have a phobia about the Germans, I laughed. Still, I'd say we've managed to pick a thing or two from their pockets and put them in our own. Yes, we took a quarter and paid them hundreds of rubles for it. We remained silent for a while. Then he said, and he caught that in America, lying on his side. Caught what? Who? What are you talking about? Kirilov. He and I spent 4 months together in a hut, lying on the floor. Have you been to America? I asked, surprised. I've never heard you mention it before. There's nothing much to mention. Just over 2 years ago, 3 of us left as immigrants for the United States. We spent our last cash on the tickets. We went to get a first-hand taste of the life of an American worker and experience for ourselves what it is like to live under the worst social conditions. That was the object of our trip. Good Lord, I laughed. Wouldn't it have been better to go to some agricultural area in this country at harvest time? If it was really for personal experience, why go all the way to America? We hired ourselves out as hands to some boss. There were 6 Russians working for him, students, landowners straight from their estates, even army officers, and all of us with the same grand objective. Well, we worked, got soaked by the rain and sweat, suffered, and exhausted ourselves. Finally, Kirilov and I walked out. We got sick and couldn't take any more of it. When he paid us, our boss shortchanged us. Instead of the $30 we were each supposed to get, I received 8 and Kirilov 15. And while we were there, we got beaten a few times. After that, we were unemployed and spent 4 months lying on the floor in that hut. He thinking of one thing, and I of something else. Did your boss really beat you in America? I can imagine you swearing at him. Not at all. On the contrary, we immediately came to the conclusion, Kirilov and I, that compared to the Americans, we Russians were just little children, and to be their equal, a man had to be born in America, or at least live among them for many years. And not only that, when, for instance, they charged us $1 for something that was worth perhaps a penny, we paid enthusiastically. We praised everything we found there, spiritualism, lynching, their makes of revolvers, and their hobos. Once when we were riding somewhere in a train, a man put his hand in my pocket, took out my hairbrush, started brushing his hair. Kirilov and I just looked at each other with a smile and decided that was the thing to do. We greatly approved of it. It's strange the way Russians not only get all sorts of notions into their heads, but even try to act upon them, I commented. Human blueprints, Shatov said. But still, they cross the ocean on an immigrant ship and land in an unfamiliar place to experiment upon themselves and so on. I must say there's a certain noble determination in it. But how did you get out of there? I wrote to somebody in Europe and he sent me 100 rubles. As was his habit, Shatov kept his head lowered while he talked, even when he became excited. Now, however, he suddenly raised it and said, "You aren't interested in the name of that man? Who was it?" Nikolai Stavrogin. He got up, went over to his desk, and started looking through the drawers for something. I remembered then that a rumor had circulated that Shatov's estranged wife had at one time had an affair with Stavrogin in Paris. That would have been about 2 years before, when Shatov was in America. If so, I wondered why he had come out with that name now. "And I still haven't paid him back," he said, once again looking me intently in the eye. Then he sat down in his chair and asked me, in a completely different tone, "I'm sure you've come to see me about something. What is it?" I told him everything in the exact order in which it had happened. I explained to him that I had now come to my senses after making that promise on the spur of the moment, but that I gathered it was so terribly important to Liza that I was absolutely determined to help her, although I wasn't even sure exactly what I had promised to do. After that, I solemnly repeated to him that she'd never had any intention of deceiving him, that it was just a misunderstanding, and that she'd been very depressed by his sudden departure. He heard me out, listening to me very carefully. "I may," he said, "have acted stupidly. I usually do. But if she didn't understand why I left, so much the better for her." He got up, went to the door, opened it, and listened. "Do you wish to see that person yourself?" "Yes, but how could it be arranged?" I said, hopefully leaving up. "Let's just go there while she's alone. But he'll give her a bad beating if he finds out we've been there. I often go there secretly. Earlier today I had a fight with him when he started on her." "What?" "I pulled him off her by his hair. He wanted to go for me, but somehow I frightened him off. And that's how it ended. Now I'm afraid he'll come home drunk, remember what happened, and give her a bad beating for it." We went hurriedly downstairs. The door of the Lebyatkin apartment was not locked, so we just walked in. The whole apartment consisted of 2 small, mangy rooms with grimy walls from which dirty wallpaper hung in shreds. A few years before, these rooms had been used as a bar and restaurant. Then the owner, Filipov, had transferred the business to his new house. The other rooms of the former bar were now locked, and these 2 rented to Lebyatkin. The first room was furnished entirely with plain benches and unpainted tables, except for one old armchair with an arm missing. In the second room, there was a bed in one corner covered with a cotton blanket. It belonged to Miss Lebyatkin. The captain himself would just fall asleep on the floor, often in whatever he happened to be wearing. The whole place was littered, and there were puddles of some liquid all over the floor. In the middle of the floor in the first room, there was a huge, soaking wet floor rag, and next to it, in the same puddle, an old worn-out shoe. It was apparent that no one bothered with anything much around here, that the stoves were not lit, that the food was not prepared. I found out later from Shatov that they didn't even have a samovar. The captain had been completely penniless when he first arrived with his sister, and Laputin had been right when he'd said that at first he had gone begging from door to door. And now that he had unexpectedly come into money, he had started to drink very hard, had completely lost his head, and of course had no time to think about a decent place to live in. Miss Lebyatkin, whom I wanted so badly to see, was sitting quietly on a bench by a plain kitchen table in the second room. She didn't make a sound when we opened the door, nor did she budge when we entered. Shatov told me that because it didn't lock, their door had once remained open wide throughout the night. In the dim light of a meager candle and an iron candlestick, I saw a woman of 30 or so, unhealthily thin and dressed in an old cotton dress that left her long, stringy neck uncovered. Her hair was thin, darkish, and rolled into a bun the size of a 2-year-old child's fist on the nape of her neck. On the table, besides the candlestick, there were a small mirror, a battered pack of cards, an old worn songbook, and a bread roll from which a couple of bites had been taken. She gave us a cheerful look, and I noticed that she used powder and rouge. She also obviously penciled her eyebrows, even though they were naturally long, fine, and dark. On her high, narrow forehead, there were 3 deep furrows, quite distinct under the powder. She didn't get up or walk while we were there, but I knew she had a limp. I imagined that when she was a very young girl, she may have been pretty. Even now, her quiet, gentle gray eyes were remarkable, and there was something dreamy and trusting in her cheerful gaze. This quiet cheerfulness was what surprised me most about her, after all the stories I'd heard about the Cossack whip and the brutalities of her brother. And oddly enough, instead of the painful, even horrifying revulsion one usually feels in the presence of creatures who have been penalized by Providence, I somehow enjoyed looking at her from the very first minute, and if I felt anything later, it was pity and certainly not disgust. That's how she sits for days on end, all alone without moving. She looks into that mirror and lays out the cards, Shatov told me as we stopped near the door. He doesn't even feed her, you know. The old woman from the cottage sometimes brings her something to eat out of pity. How can he leave her alone with a lighted candle? To my surprise, Shatov talked loudly as if she weren't in the room. "Hello, Shatsi," Miss Lebyadkin said in a friendly tone. "I've brought a visitor along, Maria," Shatov said. "I'm very pleased to see him, but I don't seem to remember him." She examined me closely from behind the candle and then turned toward Shatov again. She appeared to have completely forgotten my existence and addressed him alone. "I suppose you got bored with walking up and down in your attic?" she said, laughing and revealing 2 rows of magnificent teeth. "Yes, I got bored. And then I felt like paying you a visit." Shatov pushed a bench toward the table, sat down, and motioned to me to do the same. "I'm glad to have an opportunity to chat too. But you're a funny fellow, Shatsi. You're just like a monk. When did you comb your hair last? Here, let me comb it." She took a comb out of her pocket. "I bet you haven't touched it since the last time I combed it for you, right?" "I don't even have a comb," Shatov said, laughing. "Are you serious? Then you can have mine. No, not this one. I have another. Just remind me." And she started combing his hair, looking very serious about it. She even made a part on one side. Then she leaned back, examined the result of her efforts, and put the comb back in her pocket. "Know what, Shatsi? You're an intelligent man, I suppose, but you're bored with yourself. I don't understand you people. I can't understand how people can be bored. It's unhappiness, not boredom, really. But me, I enjoy myself." "Do you enjoy yourself when your brother's around, too?" "Are you referring to Lebyadkin? He's my servant, and it doesn't make the slightest difference to me whether he's around or not. I just call out to him, 'Lebyadkin, get me some water,' or 'Lebyadkin, bring me my shoes,' and he rushes off to do it. Sometimes I can't help laughing watching him." "And it's exactly as she says," Shatov again spoke loud, disregarding the woman's presence. "She does treat him like a servant. I've heard her ordering him around myself. 'Lebyadkin, get me some water,' and laughing as she did it. There's a difference, though. He doesn't really rush off to get it for her. He beats her instead. But she's not at all afraid of him. She has some sort of fit almost every day, and that mixes her up and makes her forget what's happened. Do you think, for instance, she remembers our walking in here? She may, but by now she has rearranged it all in her mind and takes us for very different people. Although she does have some recollection that I'm Shatsi. And my talking loud like this doesn't matter, for she never listens to people unless they address her directly. Otherwise, she stops listening and plunges into her dreams. Yes, exactly. She plunges into them. She's an extraordinary daydreamer. She can remain sitting in the same place for 8 hours, for days on end. You see that roll? She may have taken 1 bite of it since morning, and she won't finish it till tomorrow. Look, now she started telling her fortune with the cards. Yes, Shatsi, I'm trying to tell my fortune, but it doesn't come out right, the woman said suddenly, having caught the words telling her fortune. Then, without turning her head, she stretched out her left hand and took hold of the roll. She may have heard Shatov mention that too. But after holding it for a while, she put it down without taking a bite. She had become absorbed in what she was saying. It always comes out the same with these cards. A journey, a villain, someone's perfidy, a deathbed, a letter from somewhere, some unexpected news. It's all nonsense, Shatsi, don't you think? If people can lie, why can't cards? She suddenly mixed the cards up. That's exactly what I told Sister Praskovia, who was a very nice person and used to come to see me in my cell whenever she had a moment and ask me to tell her fortune, in secret, of course, from the Mother Superior. And she wasn't the only one to come and ask me. They all came, moaning and groaning and shaking their heads and chattering, but I just laughed. And why should you expect to get that letter now, Sister Praskovia, after 12 years of waiting? She had a daughter, you see, and that daughter got married and left for Turkey with her husband and was never heard of again. But the next day I'm sitting in the Mother Superior's room. She was a former princess. And we're having tea with some visiting lady, a great dreamer, that one. And also with a monk who'd been to Mount Athos, a funny little man, I thought. And what do you think happened, Shotzi? That little monk had brought a letter for Sister Praskovia that very day, straight from Turkey. So much for the Jack of Diamonds. Unexpected news, remember? Anyway, we're drinking our tea, and that monk says to the Mother Superior, "Above all, Reverend Mother," he says to her, "God has blessed your convent because there's a great treasure concealed within it." "What treasure?" the Mother Superior asked him. "Why, the blessed Sister Elizaveta, of course. And that saintly Sister Elizaveta had been living in a cage 7 feet by 5, set in a wall of the convent for 17 years, summer and winter, wearing just a coarse linen shift. And all she ever did all those 17 years was poke a piece of straw or a twig in and out of her shift. She never spoke, never washed, and never combed her hair. In the winter, they passed a sheepskin coat into her cage, and every day they gave her a crust of bread and a mug of water. The pilgrim stared, gasped, sighed, and left money. Talk of a treasure, Mother Superior says to him angrily. She disliked that Elizaveta terribly. Elizaveta sits there out of sheer spite, just because she's so mule-headed. It's all a sham. I didn't like her saying that. I was thinking of becoming a recluse myself at the time. And in my opinion, I says to them, God and nature are one and the same thing. Well, I never, they all said in one voice. The Mother Superior laughed and whispered for a while to the visiting lady. Then the lady called me over, put her arm around me, and gave me a pink ribbon. Would you like to see it, Shotzi? And then that little monk began lecturing me, but so nicely and humbly and cleverly, you know? And I sat there and listened to him. Do you understand? He asks me. No, I said, I don't understand a thing, and would you kindly leave me in peace? And after that, Shotzi, they did leave me in peace, all right. But then one day as we were leaving the church, a lay sister who was staying at the convent to atone for making prophecies said to me, Mother of God, what do you think that means? She's the great mother, the hope of the human race, I said. You're right there, she said to me. The Mother of God is our great Mother Earth, and there's great happiness for man in that. And in every earthly sorrow and in every earthly tear, there's happiness for us. And once you've soaked the earth a foot deep with your tears, you'll rejoice in everything right away. And she said, you'll not have a single sorrow, not a single one. There is such a prophecy, she told me. Those words touched me deep down inside, and I began then, when I knelt down to pray, to kiss the earth. And every time I kissed it, I wept. And let me tell you, Shotzi, there's nothing bad in those tears. And even if you have nothing to be sad about, the tears will pour from your eyes out of sheer joy. Sometimes I went to the lake shore. On one side there was our convent, and on the other our pointed mountains. That's what they called it, the pointed mountain. I climbed that mountain, faced the east, and kissed the ground. And I cried, and I didn't even know how long I stayed there crying or what was happening around me. Then I got up and turned around and watched the sun setting, so big and velvety and so pretty. Don't you like to watch the sun, Shotzi? It's so nice and so sad at the same time. Then I faced the east again and saw the shadow of our mountain stretching out far, far across the lake. Straight as an arrow. It's slender and maybe a mile long, reaching all the way to the island in the middle of the lake. It cut that island in half, and as soon as it cut it all the way through, at that very moment, the sun finished setting and everything got dark all of a sudden. And then it got dark inside me, too. I'm afraid of the dark, Shotzi. I remembered everything again. But most of all, I cried about my baby. Did you have a baby then? Shatov asked. He had been listening very attentively, and now he nudged me with his elbow. Yes, a tiny rosy baby with teeny weeny little nails And what makes me even sadder is that I can't remember whether it was a boy or a girl. Sometimes I remember it as a boy, sometimes as a girl. And as soon as I had it, I wrapped it in cambric and lace right away, tied pink ribbons around it, stuck flowers in its blanket, got it ready, said a prayer over it, and unbaptized as it was, carried it off. I carried it through the forest. I was scared, very scared, and what made me cry most was that I'd had my baby, and yet I didn't know whether I had a husband. But maybe there was one? Shatov asked, cautiously. You're really funny, Shotzi, the things you think up. All right, even if there was one, what's the good, since it's as though there wasn't one anyway? There's an easy riddle for you. Try and solve it. She gave a little snort of laughter. Where did you take the baby, then? I took it to the pond, she sighed. Shatov nudged me again. And suppose you didn't really have the baby. Suppose you simply dreamed it all up, huh? That's a hard one, Shotzi, she said thoughtfully without the slightest surprise. I can't tell you anything about that. There may not have been one. But it's really an idle question because I won't stop crying over it anyway. No, I couldn't have dreamed it all up, could I? Large tears glistened in her eyes. Oh, Shotzi, Shotzi. Is it true your wife ran away from you? She cried suddenly, placing her hands on his shoulders and looking at him with deep sympathy. Now, don't get angry, for heaven's sake. I'm sad about it myself. You know, Shotzi, I'll tell you about a dream I had. He came to me again, beckoned to me, and called out, Kitten, he said. My little kitten, come out here to me, come. And it was that kitten that made me happiest. So he still loves me, I say to myself. Maybe he'll come someday when you're awake, Shatov mumbled. No, Shotzi, that's really a dream. He'll never come when I'm awake. Do you know the song, I have no need of your tower so tall? I'll shut myself in this small cell, and I'll live on here and save my soul, and I'll pray to God to save yours too. Ah, Shotzi, Shotzi, my dear boy, why don't you ever ask me about anything? Why should I? You wouldn't tell me anyway. Right, I won't tell you, I won't tell you. You can kill me, but I won't tell you, she said, quickly catching up his words. You can burn me and I won't tell you, and they can do anything they like to me. I still won't tell them. They'll never know. Well, so you see, everyone must mind his own business, Shatov said even more quietly. But if you ask me nicely, I might tell you, she said eagerly. Won't you try asking? Ask me. Insist, Shotzi. I'll tell you everything. Convince me, Shotzi. Make me want to tell you myself, Shotzi, Shotzi. But Shatov remained silent. No one spoke for a full minute. I looked at her. Tears were running down her powdered cheeks. Her hands were still on Shatov's shoulders, but she had forgotten about them and was no longer looking at him. Ah, what do I care about you anyway, he said suddenly and pulled angrily at the bench I was sitting on. Come on, get up, he said to me and put the bench back where it had been before. Don't want him to find out when he comes home. It's time for us to go now. Ah, you're still talking about my servant, the woman said, laughing suddenly. You're afraid, eh? All right, goodbye then, dear friends. But first listen to what I have to say. Yesterday, that Kirilov fellow came in here with Filipov, the landlord, with that big red beard of his, just when my flunky was pouncing on me. So the landlord grabbed him like that and pushed him across the room. My flunky kept protesting. It's not my fault. I'm paying for another man's wrongdoing. You should have seen how the rest of us laughed. I'm telling you, we just rolled around with laughter. But Maria, I was here myself. It was me, not the Redbeard who pulled him off by his hair. The landlord came 2 days ago about a different matter. You've got it all mixed up. Wait. Come to think of it, I guess I have mixed things up a bit. So you say it was you? You must be right, but why argue about it? What's the difference who pulls him off me? She laughed. Let's get out of here now, Shatov said, abruptly tugging at me. I hear the gate creak. If he finds out we've been here, he'll beat her up. And indeed, before we'd reached the top of the stairs, we heard drunken shouting and swearing. We went into Shatov's room and he locked the door behind us. Better stay here for a few minutes if you don't want to cause a commotion. Hear him squealing like a pig? He must have tripped at the gate again. He does it every time and lands flat on his face. Unfortunately, we did not manage to avoid a commotion. Shatov stood by the locked door and listened. Suddenly, I saw him jump back. "He's coming this way," he whispered in a rage. "We probably won't be rid of him before midnight now." Fists banged on the door. "Shatov! Shatov, open up, it's me," Lebyadkin was shouting. "Shatov, my friend. I have come to greet you, dear, to tell you that the sun is waking, and its yellow shafts so clear set the forest leaves quaking. I have come to tell you, dear, to announce I am awake. Ah, God damn you, do you hear? Wide awake under the branches. You know, branches. Branches just like those birch twigs they use for spanking. Every birdie's craving for a drink. What drink would I like, do you think? I don't care as long as I drink. Anyway, damn your stupid curiosity. Say, Shatov, you have no idea how good it is to be alive. Don't make a sound, Shatov whispered to me. Come on, open up. Can't you understand that there are more important things than brawling? There are moments for honorable gestures, Shatov. I'm a kind man. Please, Shatov. To hell with those proclamations, all right? Silence. Can't you understand, you stupid idiot, that I'm in love? I've bought myself a lover's frock coat. I paid 15 rubles for it. A captain's love must have decorum. Let me in then, he roared, savagely pounding on the door with his fists again. Get the hell out of here, Shatov suddenly roared back at him. You lousy serf, and your sister's a serf too, and a lousy thief to boot. And you sold your sister. You're lying. I'm not going to take any more dirt from everyone when I can end it all by telling. Know what she is? What is she? Shatov said, swayed by irresistible curiosity. He moved closer to the door. Can't you understand what I'm saying? I'll understand when you've told me what is she. I'm not afraid to tell. I'm always prepared to say things out loud. I don't believe you'd dare, Shatov said, egging him on and motioning me to listen. You say I wouldn't dare? That's right. I wouldn't dare. Well, speak up then if you're not afraid of your master will give you a thrashing. I know you're a coward, although you claim to be a captain. She is, Lebyadkin stuttered in a trembling voice. Well? Shatov put his ear to the door. There was no sound for at least half a minute. Then Lebyadkin cursed and huffing and puffing like a samovar, withdrew downstairs. No use, he's too cunning to let it out even when he's drunk, Shatov said, moving away from the door. What's it all about? I inquired. Shatov shrugged, unlocked the door, opened it, and listened. He listened for a long time and even walked stealthily down a few steps. Finally, he came back into his room. Couldn't hear a sound. He didn't touch her. Nothing. Guess he just fell down and went to sleep at once. I guess it's safe for you to go home now. But tell me, Shatov, what am I to make of all this? That's up to you, he said in a weary, disgusted voice, sitting down at his desk. I laughed. A single rather incredible idea was gaining more and more ground in my imagination. I thought of the coming day with anguish. That's interesting.